City of Stevens Point Finance Committee meeting, recorded July 13, 2020.
That sounds terrible. It is 11 minutes after 9 on a Monday evening, July 13th, 2020. It is not 7:35 p.m. as it says on the agenda. Call the meeting to order and we'll conduct a roll call.
You got it?
I can, sure.
I can.
Dalton.
Okay.
Here.
Slowinski.
Here.
Morrow.
Here.
Shore.
Here.
And Johnson.
I am here.
All right, 5 present.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Item 2 on our agenda is contract renewal with Mr. Steve Shepro, forward appraisal for assessment services. I hope you all had a chance to review that in the meeting agenda packet. Is there anything unusual or new or different about the scope of services or this contract?
No, there's nothing unusual. It's a 3-year contract with some inflationary increases, no increase for the first year, an increase of 3.7% for the second year and 3.6% for the third year. So overall, just existing renewal and reasonable inflationary increases.
Questions from the committee? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
So moved. I second.
Okay, motion by Shore to approve as presented, second by Morrow. Any members of the public, any members of council who wish to comment on this? All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Anyone opposed would be no. Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, agreement with Portage County regarding delinquent special assessments and charges. Corey.
Yeah, so this is an existing contract, and we asked the county to modify it just because we wanted some additional clarifications in there, some things that were maybe left a little vague, and we just wanted to make sure that there was no disagreements later on. And it's always good to have very clear contracts where everybody is on the same page. So they did make the changes that we suggested, so I'd recommend approval.
All right. Are there any questions for Corey relating to this agreement? Any members of the public with questions? All right, barring none, I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Morrow to approve. Is there a second?
Alder Dalton, I second.
And there's a second by Dalton. All those in favor of the motion to approve this new agreement, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed would be no. Abstentions? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda. Whoops, got to move up here. God, it's late. I'm sorry. Investment strategy statement. Corey, go ahead. I should kind of talk about some of these things. I've been having a conversation with Corey about bringing forward different policies, either that exist or kind of occur but aren't formalized and have been done as general practice. It's my hope that the Finance Committee will be able to learn from Corey's expertise on these things. He's an expert in public finance, and I'm hoping he'll be able to enlighten us and help us make better fiscal and financial policy decisions. So go ahead.
Okay, so this is an investment strategy statement. It's a follow-up from last month's presentation on the city investments and sort of how we manage our investments, how we make decisions with our investments, and some of the real key strategies that have been very successful in managing our investment portfolio. We do have an investment policy as well. The reason why I wanted to put this in a separate strategy statement is simply because the investment policy is sort of like a backbone type statement where you are stuck to it like glue. You should never break the investment policy. This is getting into some other things that are more strategic points where it's maybe not appropriate for you to be stuck to it like glue, where maybe there's a little bit of flexibility, or your strategy might change a little bit just based on the overall investment environment and the needs of the city. So the statement is before you. It really follows a lot of the topics that we discussed last month, and available for any questions about it.
Thank you. And thank you for putting this together. I think it helps future councils as well to understand how our finances are operated. Questions for Corey? So I just want a clarification. Our investment strategy statement, this, is the more fluid, allows us to be flexible in uncertain times as long as we continue to look at our objectives, versus our investment policy is it binds us to how we are going to, and it locks in how we're going to invest. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right. Any questions from members of the public? All right. Barring any questions, I would entertain a motion to adopt this statement as policy.
Alder Morrow, so moved.
We have a motion by Morrow. Is there a second?
Anyone?
Alder Dalton, I'll second.
All right. I know everybody's tired. We're sleepy. I'll give you $1 for making a second. No, not really. All right. Any questions? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? No. Abstentions? Thank you. I think one thing too in the future, as you get new finance committees, again, public finance can be a little daunting, is just having these, this is a recommendation, and I know when I got on the healthcare center committee for the county, I received a lot of those policies that were really helpful for me in my transition. So I would strongly suggest future finance committees, as they're pulled together, to have these policies so that they're aware of them. Again, just a suggestion. All right, next item. Where are we? Discussion on capital budget planning. Yay, it's that time of year, and funding for roads.
Yes, so sorry, this one is obviously a little bit more involved. The memo is in your packet as far as some different options for funding roads. And then also, just because it does involve some numbers and some pretty specific information, I did put together a short PowerPoint presentation as well to kind of help you visualize it. So
I'm assuming the mayor is going to display it, or is he going to give you?
think if he
If you-
could,
either way, Corey, if you want me to throw it up there or if you want me to give you control, hang on, let me just do it.
okay.
Let's see, I have to. Second.
Excuse me. Technical difficulties, Mr. Mayor?
Well, so when I do the slideshow, I can't see the Zoom screen, so I can't share my screen.
Ah,
So
Okay.
let's see here. I'll get it there.
Okay. Well,
Share, and start.
yay.
Just let me know.
Awesome.
Yeah, just let me know when you need a slide.
okay, sounds good. So, well, we can go to the next slide. Talking about capital, I think it's always good to start with the problem, you know, whenever we're talking about a specific situation. And the problem that we have with capital and funding for roads is that we had a really excellent plan to fund capital replacement, and it was supposed to fully fund what we needed in terms of capital replacements. And unfortunately, costs have gone up quite a bit since we did that plan back in 2016. I think what you've seen is a real shift in construction costs and sort of in the supply and demand for those construction services. So costs have gone up far and above what we were anticipating for inflation. We have been increasing the capital budget by about $150,000 a year. That works out to about 2.5%. So it was a reasonable number for inflation, but unfortunately, the cost increases that we're seeing far exceed that, which means that we're back into this situation where we do have a gap in terms of road funding. The other problem that we have is we do have the danger of not following the plan, especially since it was really only designed to provide enough money to fund the replacement of our existing capital assets at the end of their useful lives. Now, I think we know that from time to time, we're going to want to do something more than that as a community, maybe add new amenities. And certainly that's not a problem to do new things. I think we should do new things, but we need to figure out a way to fund those things without having it create a problem with our capital replacement plan, without us having to delay necessary capital replacements because we want to add a new amenity. So those are some of the big issues as far as what I think we're trying to solve. So then we can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is the road construction budget from 2015 to 2020. You can see that it did increase fairly significantly. 2018 was actually the first year where we implemented the new capital plan with an additional $1.6 million for capital. However, what you'll notice is you don't really see a big increase in 2018 for road construction. And the reason why is because that year we had a lot of deferred capital needs, and we had over $2 million that we needed to spend in fleet replacement, replacing plow trucks, replacing a fire truck, replacing squad cars. So those other needs really prevented us from moving up that road funding how we would have liked to. And then in 2019, of course, we had the Willett Arena project. It was a $1.75 million project. So we were able to increase road funding, but not as much as we would have liked to, not as much as the plan had indicated, because we had this other major project that needed to be funded. So then 2020 is really the first year where we were able to fully implement what we planned to do as far as putting about $3.5 million into road construction. So one of the things that I think, everyone should know is we all understand that the roads are not in ideal condition and we'd like them to be in better condition. We have increased funding for roads. However, this is a problem that's been building for a long time, and we're really just now getting to the point where we're putting a more serious amount of resources into addressing that problem. And then can go to the next slide. Okay, and then as far as the changes in cost estimates, so I did get updated numbers from the Department of Public Works, and they are pretty dramatic as far as what they've come back with in terms of the original plan and then what they're indicating their costs are now. And that first column, that 2016 plan plus an inflation adjustment, like I said, we have been adding money to the plan for inflation. So basically I took it with the inflation adjustments that we've made, which represents what we currently have in our capital planning for road construction. And then I've got their new estimate, the difference, and then also the percentage increase in the last column. You can see one of the biggest items that we're getting hit on is that the resurfacing costs, that estimate has gone up by 80%, which represents a $1.4 million gap just in that item alone. Now, one option that, and I did explain this in the memo, one option that we could look at, because we're looking at about a $2.3 million gap overall, which is obviously very significant. If that's more than what the council is willing to do, we could look at lengthening that interval for resurfacing. Right now, the existing plan that we built in 2016 has basically over the 90-year life cycle of a road, you would resurface it at year 30 and year 60 and reconstruct it at year 90. So over 90 years, you'd have 2 resurfacings and 1 reconstruct. One option that, of course, you could look at if these cost increases are just simply not what we're willing to do is you could bring that down to just 1 resurfacing at 45 years and then the reconstruct at 90. It's just an option, but I thought I would throw it on the table, certainly as we're looking at, how are we going to close this gap and how are we going to fund roads? And really, when you think about it, that longer replacement cycle, as the costs have gone up and as we haven't really necessarily found more money yet to put into capital to close that gap, effectively we're already there as far as the costs go up, you don't increase the budget, your replacement cycle has effectively lengthened on its own, whether you make a specific policy decision to do that or not.
Right, I have a question.
Go ahead.
In the cost of chip sealing and resurfacing, well, and reconstruct, I guess, as well, has the dramatic dip in oil prices been factored into this, or are you just considering a constant, extremely escalated price for oil, which impacts us significantly? And what could potentially be a downturn in the economy, which could bring construction costs down because all of a sudden supply and demand shifts significantly?
Sure. And that is a great question. So the Department of Public Works was the ones that put these numbers together. And I believe what they were going off of primarily was what their bids were for 2020 projects, as well as what their expenses were for 2019 projects. So they were looking at some of those city projects that have happened recently. Now, obviously, with the economic downturn, like you said, with oil prices, you know, do you see that start to shift? And do you see that to start to shift for 2021, where maybe prices go back down? You know, I know that's a question that's on my mind as well. I don't know if the Director of Public Works would care to comment on that.
Director Badoon, are you on?
He is, and I don't know if he's having technical difficulties or not.
Yeah,
but
or he
that's
may have
really that's
stepped
really
in.
what's been happening is the prices. While you see gas prices going down and the price of oil going down, the cost of these projects is continually rising, and it's really a sourcing of the materials. The costs are just going up, and it's across the board. It's not just in the public works field. Just about everybody I talk to, the cost of materials and getting supplies. We're looking at building a dumpster corral that we approved a year ago, and they're having problems getting materials in some cases. So I think that you're going to see these prices sit here for at least a little while longer.
Well, that may be true, but we've seen, so I build landfills, so that's what I do. We've seen a significant reduction in the cost of geosynthetics because of the reduction in oil prices. Now, construction companies are still in demand because there's projects out there. And so that's great. But the price of oil and the economy is going to have an effect on this. And at least we're seeing it in impact in my industry. And even my budget's going to be a third what I budgeted for fuel expenses because fuel is so much lower, which is good because I had other expenses. But again, as we look at, you're absolutely right. Prices are going to go up, but I think, you know, is there a moderation in there with the economic downturn? And I don't know what that's going to look like. I think we'll see it in 2021 bids and projects.
Director has himself off of mute now. Director Badoon, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
There we go. Yep, we're all good now.
Good. All right, good. Sorry about that. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, we have given that some consideration, but what we don't know and what we've been talking to, you know, those suppliers and stuff is that, you know, while they're down now, they are telling us that, you know, in their opinion, they would not assume that that would be a constant going forward. So we haven't really, these numbers don't reflect what that could potentially be. As you might recall, chip seal numbers were very favorable this year to reflect the oil prices. But we don't, you know exactly what that will be. So we are using historical values here to try to project forward, but realizing that, you know, in doing so, we're hoping to, at least in the near term, capture that as a worst case scenario to where we are.
Sure.
And then one other thing I would like to point out as far as the resurfacing costs and why they've increased more, you know, so much more than say the reconstruct, you know, costs, which someone might question should be maybe more in line. And one of the reasons for that is that many of the resurfacing projects that we've taken on recently, in addition to poor pavement, have become a higher priority based upon other improvement needs, typically for bicycle and pedestrian accommodations. And not to attribute all of that cost, but some of these cost increases are due to the changes we're making to those roadways to accommodate those. So it's not necessarily just a straight, you know, repave of what's there, but there is some additional road construction, you know, road work involved in those projects, which would not have been reflected necessarily in Corey's, you know, earlier numbers.
And I would want to see an analysis of the additional costs for bike and pedestrian infrastructure, accounting for the 80%, but we can get onto that at another time. So, all right, thank you, Director Badoon. Go ahead, Corey. Thank you. I'm sorry for interrupting your flow.
Okay, no, not at all. And please continue to ask anyone who has questions. Ask them as we go. So can go on to the next slide then.
Can I interrupt one more time? This is Alder
Yes.
Swolinski.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know who said that. Absolutely.
Going back to what Director Badun had just stated, is there any way that we could see the additional impacts with those bike and pet improvements placed into these projects? I would like a breakdown.
Yes, we could definitely take a look to see what, those would be.
Okay, thank you.
That'll be for another day. Go ahead, Corey.
Okay, so looking at how we can close that gap, if we want to do something to address sort of the condition of our roads and add more funding into roads, and I know in the past, about 4 years ago, we looked at the wheel tax versus the property tax. Of course, the wheel tax is the municipal registration fee for vehicles that goes with your license plate renewal. At that time, we decided to go with the property tax, and a couple of those reasons were looking at state aid matching and how our state aid formulas work, and then also tax credits, tax deductibility. And then I know another big one when we looked at the wheel tax was sort of equity between property types. So the League of Wisconsin Municipalities recently put out an opinion that said basically that a municipality would have the ability to create a transportation utility. So looking at that as far as an option and weighing that against the property tax, looking at both sides of that as far as what's the most beneficial, comes down to a lot of the same considerations. One is with the state aid formulas. If we use the property tax, we know for sure that we're going to get matching funding through the expenditure restraint program for about 6 to 7% of what we spend. And then also we'll get state road aids for about 16% of what we spend on transportation. If we create a transportation utility, one thing that we know is we will not get the matching funding through the expenditure restraint program. So that means that that's 6 or 7% of matching funding that we would be foregoing for sure. And then for the state transportation aid, the 16%, we're not sure yet whether we would still get that on a transportation utility. I do have an inquiry into the Department of Revenue about that. They haven't found a good answer for me yet, which kind of leads me to believe that since this is a newer concept, they might not have figured that out yet. But for sure, I would say if we're giving up our state transportation funding, well then for sure, I think that moves it into the property tax column. And then you're also looking at tax credits, tax deductibility. This was a larger concern back in 2016 when a lot of people still itemized their deductions. It's not as an important of an issue now, but it is still something to take into consideration because there are still a few tax credits on the state level that our residents do qualify for. Different people would be affected differently, but it is something that still weighs to an extent on the side of the property tax. And then the final point is, are there any additional costs or staff time for the administration of this to implement this? If it's an adjustment to property taxes, the answer is there really are not any additional costs or any additional staff time that would need to go into this. If we create a separate utility and let's say have a separate allocation for each property and now need to start producing that and providing every property owner with notice of that, you are adding some administrative costs as well. Okay. And then okay, so as far as some options as far as property taxes and what the impact of property tax increases are. So these first numbers are just to give you an idea of, okay, if we do a 1% increase on the property tax, how much revenue is that? And what's the impact on a $100,000 house or a $200,000 house in terms of the assessment? So the math on this is pretty straightforward. A 1% property tax increase gets you about $170,000. The impact on a $100,000 house for that is basically $10. And on a $200,000 house, real simple, you just double it, it would be $20. If we went with a 2.5% increase, you're looking at $425,000 as far as the revenue that it would raise. If your house is assessed for $100,000, you'd be looking at $25. A $200,000 house would be $50. And then I have the numbers for a 3.5% increase as well. And that's just to give you an idea as far as how various percentages and property tax increases would affect the amount of revenue that the city collects and the amount that our property owners would pay. So if we want to move to the next slide.
Delayed response.
So
Sorry, I was reading the chats. Apparently, that's
Yes,
little
we'll give
intriguing,
Alder
yeah.
Slawinski an opportunity here. I want to move the discussion off of the chat and onto public dialogue. So,
okay. So did you want me to keep going or?
Alder Slawinski, if you wish to have your say, you certainly can do it now. I just don't want to have it
No,
in
go ahead.
the
Keep
Zoom.
going. I can speak my piece at the end.
All right, thank you.
Okay. All right. So thinking about what's reasonable and what the city really needs to account for inflation, because costs do go up over time. And really in a normal year, we could look at a 2.5% increase. And that would be a reasonable amount that's about in line with inflation. That would be $425,000 in additional revenue a year. And then for the property taxes that we collect, currently about 70% of the tax levy goes to the operating budget. So if we had a 2.5% net new construction number, you'd be looking at an increase to the operating budget of about $297,000. And then your increase to capital would be about $128,000. And that would be via the debt service levy, which of course is what we use to fund capital. And then I did mention before that we have been increasing the capital budget by about $150,000 a year, which is about 2.5%. So we would also need to increase the amount of fund balance that we use for capital by about 2.5% as well, just so that the whole budget continues to increase with inflation. So that's just one scenario if we would think that a normal increase would be about 2.5%. I can go to the next slide. Okay, so now if the council wanted to get a little bit more aggressive with capital and try to close some of this gap and maybe go with a 3.5% increase instead, the net new construction number wouldn't change. And in a normal year, we really take that full net new construction adjustment just because we need it for the operating budget. So you'd still be looking at about $297,000 going to that increase in the operating budget to cover inflation and wages and salaries and benefits and so forth. And then that additional 1% increase could go entirely to capital. So that'd be about an additional $170,000 just for capital. So this is I guess one way that we could start to close that gap, if that's what the council wants to do, to add an additional amount just for capital. And then you can go to the next slide. Now, of course, notice that I did talk about normal years. And now if we look at actual years, for the 2020 budget, so we had a 3.1% increase in the overall tax levy, about $512,000 in additional revenue. The net new construction number for the 2020 budget was, of course, very good, 3.99%. So because that year was pretty high on the net new construction number, you had a larger increase that was driving. So one of the things that we did for the 2020 budget was we didn't have any increase in the tax levy for debt service, which effectively means that we didn't have any increase in the tax levy for capital. What we did was we used additional fund balance in order to keep that increase more reasonable. Just knowing that, okay, the operating budget was going to be increasing a little bit more. We were going to address some priorities there. Trying to sort of smooth out that impact, we leaned on being able to use fund balance to do the inflationary increase in capital that year to kind of smooth that out. So that is one thing when we're talking about capital and planning and tax rates, there is that ability to sort of smooth things out to an extent. And then we can go to the next slide. So now for the 2021 budget, even if we're just looking at a 2.5% increase, unfortunately for the 2021 budget, the estimated net new construction does not look at all as positive as it did last year. And that's just the timing of when construction projects have been completed and the timing of those tax base expansions. So right now, and this is a very preliminary number, I'll have better numbers in August, but basically we're only looking at around 1.2% in net new construction. So what that means is that for the 2021 budget, it'll be a very light year as far as an increase in the operating budget and the impact of that on the overall tax levy. So if we wanted to, again, smooth things out a little bit, if we stuck with a 2.5% increase, then now your increase for capital could be $296,000, almost $300,000. And basically what you would effectively be doing is in the years where you have a really good net new construction number, you can kind of back off that increase for capital. And then the years where that net new construction number isn't really very high, you can ramp up that increase on capital a little bit so that it all offsets and you get sort of a smooth increase in the tax rate so you don't have huge jumps. Can move to the next slide. And then for the 2021 budget, if you really wanted to be aggressive, you could look at a 3.5% increase, and obviously that would be a fairly sizable increase for capital, about $450,000. So, and then next slide. So, some of the overall decisions that, we need to make, and I would like some feedback from the council on this is, how much do we want to invest in roads and other capital assets? Are we going to try to get back to a 30-year resurfacing cycle? How aggressive do we want to be in phasing in any adjustments? And of course, it's a balancing act between the tax rate and the amount of money that we have to put into capital. And also, what's an acceptable percentage for property taxes to increase? If I get some feedback on that, then certainly we can work on different plans. What I gave you today was really just examples, but we can, I can calculate numbers all day and very happy to do that. And then the next slide. Okay, so for the 2021 budget, September is when we'll present capital. So that is coming up as far as thinking about, okay, how much do we want to increase capital for 2021? What does the council consider to be an acceptable option as far as an adjustment in the tax rate? And then can go to the final slide here. And then this is another big lingering question, is how do we fund new assets? And I've talked with some other department heads about this concept, and I think there is a lot of concern about pitting new amenities versus existing needs and existing needs to replace capital assets. And we don't want to have that sort of tug of war between those different priorities. So the thinking is that really they shouldn't be fighting over the same pot of money. They really should be different pots of money. And one of the ways that we can do this to make it work is when we're looking at adding a new amenity, we can think about, well, basically, we can look at what is that impact on the property tax levy. We can spread it out over a number of years if we need to, and then we can evaluate that to say, okay, if we go with this new item, it's going to be this impact on the tax rate for this long, whether that's 5 years or 10 years or 2 years, and then really evaluate, okay, what amenities do we want as a community and what are we willing to pay for them? So, and that's my last slide, but I do think that that is an important concept because as you saw with one of the first graphs as far as our funding for roads, I think one of the things that you can see is, if we aren't able to sort of stay focused on the capital replacement, or if that money needs to get diverted to go somewhere else, then obviously that can have a real impact on being able to implement that plan. So it's just something that we really need to think about as far as how do we make it all work in terms of capital, in terms of meeting the needs of the community, and also staying within what people can afford to pay. So, and that's the last slide. So with that, I'll take any other questions or any discussion.
Well, I was wondering about what amen do we want? And I wondered if that was a prayer, if we were supposed to be praying now to somehow figure this out.
Yeah. I just noticed that as well. I'm pretty sure I meant to say amenity.
I figured.
And I don't know what happened to the I, the T, and the Y.
It evaporated. So,
yeah.
Alder Slawinski, I know you've been waiting a long time. I didn't mean to cut you off before, and I just wanted to point out, try to avoid having the discussion in the chat box. So.
Thank you. And again, that's where I was concerned, is what I had brought up during Corey's presentation is something that absolutely needs to be looked at. As you all know, I mean, I've fought for this for many years and months here regarding some of these projects that we've been voting and approving, regarding if they are really needs in the community or are they more wants. And I'm just really concerned. I will not support any additional increase again. We just did it back in 2016. And, with the county and the schools increasing, their portion of what they're taking from taxpayers, it's just, we cannot continue to do this. I mean, is it basically so if we add more money to our capital budget, that just means that we can spend recklessly as we've been? No, I think it's time that we really start looking at what we're spending our money on and worry more about the needs of the city and not the wants. Corey gave me a breakdown of sent me a spreadsheet of a breakdown of kind of some of the projects that have popped up in the last few years, that weren't budgeted. And it's pretty interesting, the numbers that he calculated for me within the last, 2018 and 19, and as of, where we're at right now, currently in 2020, over $1 million was spent on projects that weren't budgeted. Now, some of them are, legit items that, came up that were unexpected, that were, basically needed to be taken care of. But over that, almost nearly half of the $11 million that was spent, that wasn't budgeted, were on walk projects, Stanley Street improvements, Schrader Connection Trail, Emerson Park. It's just, we need to start reining in our spending here. And we cannot continue to go to the taxpayers and ask them for more money. Now, I know we have another agenda item. I think it's the next one that I will, speak again on this. That it's just, we need to start reining our spending in here. And I'd like to hear from other alders. It seems like I never hear from any other alder as far as, what they're hearing from their constituents. But when I ran back in December, where I decided I wasn't going to run, and then I did, I couldn't believe the amount of people that were contacting me, not just in my district, but throughout the city, just saying, Jeremy, you're the one that's fighting for us. So again, I'm glad that Corey put this presentation together, and I hope that we really start looking at how we're spending our money, and we cannot continue to go and ask the taxpayers for more. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Corey, for the presentation. I think the devil is in the details as we describe needs and wants, which is a much bigger discussion. Other members of the committee who have some questions or comments related to this topic right now?
One of the topics that I have, all tomorrow, District 11. Even with the tax increases, it doesn't seem to really put a dent into how much the prices have really gone up. Even if we didn't, I'm not saying that we would, but even if we didn't, even if we did increase the amount of levy, we'd still be about $1.5 million in the hole, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So, even with that, and with the prices going up, and up, I still find it kind of odd with the prices going up as oil prices have gone down and down. That's also a concern. But I am hearing about the levy rate as well. And again, as Alder Slawinski said, needs and wants, and that's one of the things we have to try to always things that we always need to also think about and consider each time. But Corey has a way of finding things, but it's how do we allocate the few resources that we have.
Thank you, Alder Morrow. Any other members of the committee wish to ask questions, comment?
President Johnson, I have a comment.
Oh, sure. Alder Kneebone, sounds like.
Yes, it is, Alder Kneebone. Please don't forget my alleys. Thank you.
Yes, I will never forget your alleys, ever, ever. Did I see Alder Shore? Did you have your hand up? Or no, it was Alder Nabel. Sorry. Go ahead. Members of the public, alders, go ahead. Alder Nabel.
Thank you, President Johnson. You can hear me, right? I did hit the right button.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'd just like to respond to something that was mentioned and is very reasonable that was mentioned by Alder Slawinski, the needs and the wants. And I agree with him on a lot of things about our needs and our wants, and that we have to balance those with what needs to get done on. I have had a lot of people complaining about our streets in town that have been put back and not been filled, or just so bad that bicyclists are falling. on them because there's a lot of potholes on Briggs Street. And then I saw College Avenue got repaved, and that's already been reconstructed years ago. So it's hard to believe when some of these come up, and I know there's always a reason. But what our constituents see is when something like that gets done is like, well, what about us? And I also want to make sure that you understand that when I will fight for Emerson Park, as we in this area, in the inner part of city, pay the higher taxes per our properties, and we have small lots. And so for us to have a inner city park that is finally been something that's coming true and through for us is very important. It's not just a need or a want. It's unfair how much more taxes we pay for our property, our smaller properties, than others do that are out and have larger properties. And so I think that it needs to be reminded that we've been taking that on a lot in the districts that are in the middle here of the city. And we have. I would like to say that I do think that the garbage corral was an issue brought up and was going to be taken out of the funds at one time. I'm still against that. Those kinds of things should be done through the businesses. I don't understand why we are doing it. And I really feel that we've done a lot of things that sometimes are for other people's benefits and not really for the general population of the city. And we have to be really careful. Roads are really important, and they have gotten pretty bad. So I would want to make sure you understand that the inner part of the city has gotten a lot of attention lately on the fact of new buildings and things coming in, but we haven't gotten any attention on our streets as much, or on this park that we want, or other items. It's all the trails are for things around the outside of town. So please remember that. Don't just lump us, because of Emerson, as being greedy, because we're not. I don't think we've been greedy at all.
All right. Just one comment, I think, Corey, to your fundamental question. I think as we approach this, a prudent and reasonable escalation is appropriate. I don't think I could support 3.5%. 2.5% is something I think that's doable. We're never going to make everybody happy. It's not going to happen. But I think if we escalate things in a prudent way, even though the cost of doing business is escalating beyond that, at least we don't find ourselves like the county did and found themselves with wages $1 million behind because they didn't try to keep up with the cost of inflation. So that's my perspective. But anyway, I'm sure we'll have more discussions about this. Thank you. All right, next item on the agenda is, here we go, funding for appraisal of properties per DOT requirement that are part of a potential extension of the Green Circle across the Plover River at I-39. I see we have a number of people who have been very, very, very patient. I see Mr. Menzel sitting there. Thank you for being so patient. We've got a few other folks. Dan, did you want to queue up the presentation or Mike, thank you. I just want to, as we look at this, and you look at all of the different people presenting here, and people not showing on this are DOT and DNR, and this has been a massive collaboration. I love collaboration between state and local units of government, between local units of government and one another, between the departments working collaboratively, and private organizations. This has been a stunning, masterful work of everyone kind of focused. I don't think we can say enough about the work that DOT and DNR has provided on this, and they'll talk about that later. The last thing I'll say is I was talking to Matt over at Auto Select on the east side where I take all my vehicles. And he's said to me a long time, put in a plug for Auto Select. And he's a constituent. So every time I go there, he's Melissa, we've got to have a transportation corridor that's not Highway 10. He said, I would love to see the Green Circle Trail reach around to the east side, where the east side of Stevens Point is disconnected. So it would be great to see that connection. When I showed him the draft of this PowerPoint, he was like, let me know what I can do to help make this happen. He said, I'll talk to every single business on the Highway 10 corridor. I know they would support this. So I'll leave it there. I want to thank everyone who's worked on this. And I know you all put a lot of hard work, a lot of time into it. And from there, Alder Kneebone, this is in your district. I didn't know if you wanted to say anything.
Yes, indeed. You mentioned Auto Select. I will speak for the Trek Bike Shop and the cycling community in on the east side of 39. I have come across coming home and seen mom and dad and a small child waiting at the light at Target on bikes to cross 10 to get on the sidewalk to come into town, to come west into town. Highway 10 is not the place you want anybody to be riding a bike, much less little kids. People use that corridor a lot because it's the only one we have. We have no connection to the Green Circle Trail. In fact, I use my stimulus money to put a hitch on my car and buy a bike rack. So I can put my bikes on the car and drive across 39 and hook up with the Green Circle Trail so I can have a ride. So in my mind, this is something that it's not a want, it's a need.
And to look at this transportation corridor or this additional transportation corridor to connect our east side of Stevens Point with the west side of Stevens Point, all the people who live over on the east side and and their employment on the west side of Stevens Point. I will let Director Kramer really take it from here.
Okay, thank you, President Johnson. So we did go ahead and put together a real quick PowerPoint presentation. The memo is pretty detail oriented in terms of getting into some of the weeds and logistics of the Plover River crossing. We would like to just kind of touch on some of the high points, and then obviously we can answer questions at the end. Mayor, if you're running the presentation, could you go to the next slide? So first and foremost, the Plover River crossing. I think everyone's probably familiar with certain aspects of this project, but really it's the missing link. And by missing link, we mean that it's the point. It's a project that's been talked about. It's in the comprehensive outdoor rec plan. It's in the bike and ped plan. It's been a concept that has been investigated, talked about, and it's been carried in certain aspects with different groups of people, but it really has gained some steam and some traction over the last several months since early 2020. In early 2020, you'll see some pictures here in this first slide. A group of people came together. It was referenced earlier, a real diverse group. The group was made up of city staff from several different departments. It included former parks directors for the county and the city. It included the Mid-State Technical College, both the staff and student level. It had representatives from the Green Circle Trail, and then some community members from vast backgrounds, some that were former DNR and retired, some that were affiliated with the university or potentially retired from the university. We really had a group makeup of what can we do? This idea has been around. Where do we take it from here? What are our options? You'll see these pictures going back to when there was still snow on the ground that show when we met on the site, just kind of took a walk around and tried to investigate what are the options out here. Really from that first meeting on pre-COVID, which you see up in the top right-hand corner at my office here at the Park and Rec building, even to multiple site visits out during COVID, before, during, and even currently here recently, there's been a ton of collaboration, cooperation, discussions about let's identify an option here, what the best option is. Let's try to carry this idea as far as we can based on some of the planning and the concept documents in the comprehensive outdoor rec plan and the other planning documents that we have. So through all that collaboration, that led us to the next slide here, in which we tried to identify the route. Okay, where is the best place to cross? And what we have gotten to through multiple meetings, a lot of investigation, is what we consider the Benz Lane route, or the primary or preferred route that we're investigating. As we all know, dollars and cents play a role in a lot of these projects, and this project is definitely a big undertaking, and that's one of the elements that has been identified or looked at in the past, and that's one of the things that we were cognizant coming in. When we went down in the area and took a site visit, at that point, we really were just saying, where can this thing go? And to not get again into the weeds of it, but there's a large elevation change as you go into this area from where the houses are built in this region, where the street level is, and then where you start to drop down and go towards the wetland areas, towards the Plover River. So if some of the first routes and even portion of the alternative route show that our elevation changes are a big hurdle. The engineers will probably talk more about some of those things later, but the primary route, the Benz Lane route or preferred route that we identified, uniquely and kind of by accident, by walking around out there, we identified a logging road. It was depicted in the packet that showed a location where the trees have been already removed. It shows a gradual decline that goes down into that location, but it runs across private property. As we discuss more and why this agenda item is here before you tonight, is we started to look and say, okay, is this our best route? We believe it is. We see that it's a primary or pretty close to a straight line through that location, but it does cross 2 private property parcels. So as we look further, taking costs and things of that into consideration further, we are aware that one of the large potential funding avenues is the Transportation Alternative Program, or the TAP grant process. So we investigated, looked through some other alternatives, and again, a lot of investigation. We identified what would be the first step if that's something to become a project in the future, and several years down the line after we get further into this. We believe that the first thing that needed to be looked at was the property piece of it. If this route, the preferred route, is to come to fruition, we believe this is the largest piece that needs to be identified up front, so that planning can either continue or we can shift gears and go a different route or look other ways. The grant process is a detailed one. There's several steps, and tonight what the request is for the ability to spend up to $10,000 to allow the appraisal and the negotiation process to go forward with the private property landowners for this stretch of, or this preferred route of trail. The steps that are needed in this, essentially, this is considered acquisition of property or easements in anticipation of a project that a grant would be applied for. That's the technical term. What that requires is someone from the DOT preferred route, or preferred provider list, I should say, which is some criteria that vendors or consultants have to go through to be accepted on that list. You have to hire one of those consultants through a competitive process. They have to start with an appraisal. After the appraisal piece is completed, the property owners will be allowed to do an appraisal as well, and then a negotiation can take place. That process is clearly identified and detailed in the grant, and that's what we're seeking to move forward with at this point in the project. As we would move forward, all that would ultimately do is identify if this is an option, and then if there was something agreed to in terms of an actual purchase of an easement or the acquisition of a parcel, those would be things that would be in front of the Finance Committee and Common Council as a 2021 project. We believe this route, as we know and has been discussed here tonight, can open up a tremendous amount of recreational, leisure attractions and travel, as well as things for work and business. And now the next slides are going to go a little further into the engineering aspects with Director Badun and Director Joel Lemke.
Thanks. Looks like I'm off mute. I'll start off on this slide. Scott and I are going to cover this one. Really wanted to, I mean, the renderings kind of give it a good idea if you can kind of get a picture of the crane sitting there where Green Circle Trail just about comes to the river off the end of Hoffmeister. But really wanted to give an idea of this is no doubt a safe alternative to some passage across town, over the interstate, over the river, that whole connection over there, and this given that other alternative. It was highlighted before, but in addition to kind of recognizing how nice it's been to get the support of the DOT and the DNR, I think that should also kind of speak to the fact that they've recognized through that cooperation that this is a good project, one to, sink some effort into. So just wanted to kind of highlight that a little more. And then I think Scott's going to cover the other ones, and we'll talk timeline a little bit.
Thank you, Director. Yes, so one of the biggest components of this, and depending upon how you look at it, there's been a lot of talk, Green Circle Trail and stuff like that. But the other part I think that's just even more distressed is the TAP grant. And in TAP, we keep using the acronym of that, but as it's written there at the bottom of the slide, it's the Transportation Alternative Program. And what that is that's not recreation. This is commuter use. This is transportation. This is allowing people the choice to take an alternative use versus just jumping in their automobile to get to their destination. And in this day and age, more and more people are using that alternative. They're taking an alternative means of transportation. And there is, as was been mentioned, this disconnect. And what this does, and this was, this is nothing new. This has been looked at before. This is part of the bike and ped, plan. It's just a matter of that it's kind of come back, and it's come back with some steam, which is nice to see. But this is a huge part of that, and not to say anything less of what the DOT is planning for the Highway 10 bridge. But anytime, as Director Lemke said, you can move, there's a safety component. If you can move off the highway from there, you've automatically increased something safety that the DOT could never accomplish by keeping it on the highway. So that whole component there, is very, very important with what this project is trying to accomplish. In addition to that, though, there are some other technical parts that come along with that Transportation Alternatives Program grant, which is mentioned on the slide as well, which is really just to bring everybody up to speed so that no one has any misconceptions of what it is we're trying to do, because it's imperative to functioning as a commuter trail that it be available. So the building and maintaining of the infrastructure is very specific to what's required here. A couple of things that would otherwise be needed is, one is the path would have to be a minimum of 12 feet wide. We couldn't narrow down the path to try to accommodate for costs or any other approach to that without going through the DOT to get their approval, because we're trying to create a corridor that people can utilize in multimodal situations, walking, biking, and do that comfortably. In addition to that, there's maintenance that's going to be required, predominantly that for snow removal in the winter. So this needs to be engineered and built in such a way that can take on the equipment that would be needed to do that. And again, we're trying to create an alternate transportation route here. So what we're trying not to do is just limit it to seasonal use. So we can look at this and tie to it, and it's a great, call it spur off the Green Circle Trail, but it is yet so much more in the engineering world and transportation world, because this is really a transportation project. This is not a recreational project. So two very big important points there related to the engineering. In the lower left corner there is a potential schedule to show how this might lay out and kind of what we're really asking for now. And as Director Kramer said, looking at the appraisal so we can get land purchase potentially next year, that keeps us kind of moving along in the time frame here. But ultimately, we're looking, this project isn't going to happen overnight. There's definitely more engineering that needs to be done. There's definitely the TAP grant application, the award we need to get there long before we get to construction. But this is kind of laying out. So we need to get started if we're ever going to finish, is really what we're trying to otherwise convey here. And some of the scheduling may change. This is definitely a high level view of what this could be. I could even see the engineering being maybe moved earlier to it. TAP grant and the total cost of project, we'll see where those kind of come in during some of this more evaluatory process, and it may be favorable for us to move engineering forward, so that we get to TAP grant application, we have that completed. But in essence, I think the biggest point is that we have certain milestones that we're going to try to meet. This isn't going to happen overnight. There's a lot of work yet needs to be done to get there, but I think we have a great start. And as Director Kramer said, what I really request is the money for the appraisal is a huge first step to moving along on that timeline.
Okay, so this is my slide, the economic community development portion of it. We've talked a lot tonight about the safety aspect of it. And I think Alder Kneebone kind of hit it right on the head. Was there really is no comfortable way for bicyclists or pedestrians or anyone who's not in a vehicle to get from the west side of the town, the original development area, to what was essentially massive sprawl that occurred in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. At that time, the mentality was we have this massive growth, we have to grow. There wasn't a lot of great alternative transportation planning that was occurring within the city. And it's not only within the city, but just in the planning profession as a whole. And so what this connection does is it corrects some long-term mistakes of past urban planning decisions. And that's a really critical component here. I want the committee to think about, okay, if I'm going to go on the Green Circle Trail and I don't want to cross the Highway 10 bridge, where's the next reasonable alternative? You can go up Burlesky, up by the Jordan Dam, and connect up there and come way back down. Think about the amount of time that would take you if you're looking at an alternative, or bicycling it or anything like that. The other alternative would be to go essentially down south of the Crossroads Commons area, get on Porter, get on Hoover, and then come back up. Two inconvenient routes for anyone who's trying to get to the downtown, or anyone who's trying to get from the residential core of the city to the east side of I-39. And so this really helps alleviate the travel time. It helps alleviate the safety concerns of the Highway 10 overpass. I know when my grandparents were still living on the east side of Stevens Point and I would bike out there during college, I would take the Highway 10 overpass, and it was awful. I hated every moment of it because people are coming off the on-ramps. They're not paying attention to bicyclists. They're not paying attention to anyone other than the vehicles that are driving by them. And so not only do you have to be extremely a defensive bicyclist or pedestrian, you had to be aware of what others were doing in their vehicle, and that made for a really uncomfortable situation. Also, I want to touch base on, if we look at the expansion of the Green Circle Trail, think about all the marketing and all the promotional items that the city and the county and the business council put out there. A lot of it is based on this amazing community asset like the Green Circle Trail. And so anytime we have the opportunity to address safety concerns, address adding additional alternative transportation through the Green Circle Trail to our community, it's something that this council, I would hope, would embrace, because every time we talk about, well, what is Stevens Point? What makes Stevens Point set out from other parts or other areas of the state or other communities that are similar in scope and size? The Green Circle is always part of that conversation. And so that's just something to remind yourself as we have these conversations. And tying that in, it aligns our community for some long-term economic and community success. The Highway 10 corridor is a business district. It is an important piece of our community. It is a tax revenue generator, and it's important that we continue to make it a thriving place. This helps us get to that end goal. And so from the economic development, the community development position, this connection makes a lot of sense. It's good urban planning. It's good economic development.
Hello, this is Steve Menzel. I'm the president of the Green Circle Trail Board. I've been with the board for about a dozen years, and an avid user of the trail as well. But thanks for the chance to talk with you. I guess only thing I can add to what's been presented already is this idea is an old dream for the Green Circle Board for years, with a number of routes explored by the Green Circle, including by founder John Jury and others. However, the dream always seemed to fade for various reasons, including the engineering involved in finding an appropriate spot to cross the river, and then building the bridge, and the complexities of working with multiple property owners for the necessary land acquisitions and easements that you need. And perhaps most importantly, the fact that the cost of all this would far exceed the Green Circle Trail's resources. The Green Circle already spends, it's about $100,000 a year just to maintain and enhance the existing 27-mile trail. And we typically can't afford to develop what we refer to as trail spurs. And just for those who aren't familiar with the term, a spur, examples of current spurs that we have are the Hoover Road Trail Spur. It's about a 4.5-mile paved trail that connects the village of Plover with the Green Circle. Then there's another spur called the Heartland Trail Spur. It's about 2.5 miles paved trail along Patch Street that connects to the Green Circle to the Portage County Business Park. And then the Schrader connection, which some of you are probably familiar with because it's a more recent addition. And that's roughly a 2-mile granite commuter trail that follows the former railroad bed that connects the Green Circle's paper mill trail in the village of Whiting to Bliss Avenue on Stevens Point's south side. So those are just some examples of what the spur trails are. The Green Circle doesn't directly maintain those spur trails, but they are incredibly important because they form an important network that makes the Green Circle more accessible to people in our community. These connections are vital to the quality of life in Stevens Point and to our overall sense of community because it connects people. Then I guess so in summary, I guess it's really a practical and beautiful potential addition. Why is it a dream come true for us? First of all, it's practical. In addition to enhancements in safety and transportation, it has the potential to connect important neighborhoods in the Washington School, Janik Circle, Barbers Lane area with the Bannock School, Maple Bluff, Brolowski Road area, including, and this I feel for in my own experience, including the youth soccer fields, which maybe not this summer, but most summers, there are just tons of families that are out there. And then of course the Ice Hawks Arena, which is right next to it. East of I-39, there are about 3,500 residents living in the triangle north of Highway 10 East, south of Highway 66, and east of County J, if you can imagine that triangle. When you extend that triangle out to the north and east boundaries of Portage County, the number expands to over 10,000 residents. If you could just give me the next slide there. As practical as the idea might be, what is truly stunning is the natural beauty of the land this route would go through. In the span of only a quarter of a mile, it traverses through a diverse microcosm of everything we love about hiking and biking in central Wisconsin. Our amazing Plover River, which supplies our community with water, and its islands. Yes, there are 2 small islands on this route, believe it or not. Wetlands teeming with birds and wildlife. There's a little bit of forest land. It's not what I would call a forest maybe, but there's plenty of trees on this section, and beautiful prairie grasslands. In fact, I walked it a few weeks ago, and I'm 6'6", and the grasslands are up close to my chest in height. So it's probably higher than that now. So just a beautiful area. So if we can make this dream come true, I think it might be the most important Green Circle trail spur yet, and undoubtedly one of the most beautiful. Thanks for letting me talk.
President Johnson, you're muted.
Still muted.
I'm muted.
There.
Can I go to bed now?
Yeah.
Please. I've got a bed right here. It's right here. I could lay down and just go to bed. So thank you, Mr. Menzel, very much for waiting so long. That's what I was saying. Questions, comments? I do have a comment here from Director Schrader, former Director Schrader, who couldn't stay with us. I will read that. I promised him I would do that. It says, keep in mind, I-39 basically splits the city in half for walkers and bikers. With that in mind, there are 5 crossings of the Plover River west of I-39. Those are at Highway 66, at Iverson Park, at Patch Street, Business 51, and at Tommy's Turnpike. Whereas there is only 1 crossing over the Plover River east of I-39, and that's at Jordan Park. Therefore, another river crossing east of I-39 for walkers and bikers is very much needed. Thank you for your time and consideration of this item. And then he says, please stay awake. So.
It was past his bedtime, to be fair.
It was past his bedtime. He's retired now, you know. So, questions from the committee?
This is Alder Slinsky.
Yes, go ahead.
And I'm sure everyone's probably thinking I'm going to come and just be completely against this. I think this project is great for the community. As most of you know, I went back to college here a few years back for civil engineering, and for my final bridge project, I designed, did the engineering for this bridge. That was my final
Wow.
project.
Nice.
I was so intrigued by this area and you know, the possibility of putting a bridge crossing here. So I think this is a great community project. That's where I'm gonna basically start questioning is in the memo that we received, it basically states for the funding, you know, we're gonna apply for the TAP grant. Additional funding might be needed via additional grants, fundraising campaign, and the city capital budget. Why is just our city contributing to this? Why aren't we asking Town of Hall? Why aren't we asking the Village of Park Ridge? Why aren't we asking these surrounding municipalities? This is a community project. In Ryan, Director Karnofsky's slide, multiple times it says in there, community, community, community. Why is it always the city that has to come up first with the money? Perfect example, when we were talking about the Fox and Create Portage County going in there, the city was the only one that stepped up. Again, why is it always the city? I just, am I missing something here? Have we, is there any effort, collaborative effort with other municipalities or, you know, for fundraising? Look at what just happened with this TAP grant that we just did for those bike lanes. We got, I mean, we ended up on the hook for an additional $220,000. Is this what we want to do here? Is we want to get into this and then basically nobody else, we don't have the funding and who's going to pay for it? The city. Let's get a group together first and say, hey, this is what we want to do. Not start paying for it and then we're so invested in it that we have to finish it. And it's all on our dime. That's my only concern here. Again, I think this is a great project. We need this. But let's do it as a community effort and not just the city taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Slowinski. I just want to state that this is time sensitive as it relates to getting this appraisal work. I think it's a great idea to let's build a community to figure out how to raise additional money for this, all for that. This particular thing right now is time sensitive and we'd have to take this step. Let's take the first step and see if we can get others to follow. So other members of the committee, Alder Shore, and you would need to unmute. Thank you.
And I did. Thank you, President Johnson. So, picking up on Alder Slowinski's point, actually, I think compared to the other two examples he gave, that there's an even stronger case, particularly with reference to Town of Hall and Village Park Ridge, and you know where this is and where they are. But what I wanted to clarify, it looks like the matching here is actually even a little better than the previous one. If I read it correctly, the ratio, and maybe because it's a larger project and because the second, you know, anything over $1 million, but even on that first $1 million, it seemed like 4-to-1, where I seem to recall 3-to-1 on the previous. I don't know if anybody can clarify that.
I don't know if that would be Director Kramer, Comptroller Treasurer. I think what we're quite a ways away from
No, of course.
all of the matching. Again, the action before us is really about approving the money for the appraisal. I think if the committee is interested, we can have this return with these recommendations on creating this community collaborative, and maybe it's a subcommittee of the finance committee.
I take the point that these are both questions for another time.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I'll do the rest first, the committee, Alder Nabel. Any other members of the committee have any questions? Comments?
Alder Dalton.
Go
Chair
ahead,
Johnson.
Alder Dalton.
Go ahead, Alder Dalton. Yeah, just very exciting to see this project, and obviously I think from our prior discussion talking about what assets do we want to invest in, I think this is exactly the type of diversification of our assets that has a net positive on the well-being of our residents, not only for transportation, kind of basic necessities of living in a community, but also recreation. So I'd like to make a motion to approve the funding for the appraisal.
Okay, we do have a motion. Oh, I'm getting an echo, sorry.
A second.
And a second, who did the second? Alder Shore. I will let Alder Nabel speak now because she's had her hand up.
Thank you, President Johnson. I am thrilled that they would be looking at this. This is a great and a lot of work that's been put forward, and I want to thank all those that have been involved, because obviously it's been a lot of time and energy on it. And are we looking at this as like, this is $10,000 just to do the survey that we're looking for approval of? Is that
right? Yep.
And I would like to say again, as Alderman Sliwinski said, I still think it's $10,000 that we have not to just throw away, not have people already committed to this, doing this with us. It's so, I mean, I know this is time sensitive, but why weren't we working with these groups prior to this to get them on this? This is something that is definitely town of Hull. Again, look at how much money we just spent on the road, you know, by the country club drive and stuff. We need to get that kind of stuff back from those groups of Park Ridge and town of Hull to invest in our city, because they are connected with us.
Yes.
And so I really feel we need to have that. I don't know why it wasn't done prior to this. And again, it always comes down to this time sensitivity. We don't even have $10,000 to waste if this wouldn't work with a group. That's my comment.
I agree in good long-term planning, which is why I've been pushing for a strategic plan, which we will be doing this year. I think once we do that, then we can have those sort of priorities identified earlier. And Director Kramer, go ahead, please.
I do want to mention that we actually do have a plan to make a presentation to some representatives from our group to the town of Hull. We did not want to go there prior to coming to this group to see if there was support for the idea, but that is on the docket to discuss the project, share with their board, and then see hopefully form a partnership. We do have some other, at least one other private entity business in town, very reputable, that has also reached out on plans to come to the table if this continues to move forward. So I will say the committee's tried to realize there's some real partnerships I think that can exist, but also realizing that because of some of the timing elements and things we know of the private properties, that we felt this was a good time to try to proceed with that component of it, knowing that there is several partnerships that are crucial, hopefully commercial and local with our community members, that we can get involved to continue this theme forward.
Thank you, Director Kramer, for also adding that extra information. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we have a motion on the floor and a second. If there is no further discussion.
I would like to, and I know it's late, I just want to say one more thing. You know,
sure.
I just want to go on the record and state that, because I am not going to support this, just for the simple fact that we basically are starting this out as the only entity moving forward with this project without having any other entity with skin in the game, I guess, if you will.
Sure. I'm
going to be voting no on this, and it's not because I don't think it's a great project. It's more of the financing end of it. So thank you.
Completely understand, Jeremy. All right. We have a motion on the floor and a second to approve the funding for this. All those in favor, oh, who's
in the audience?
Sure, why not?
Just very, very quickly, Bob Weir, 727 2nd Street. We're halfway through the budget year right now. where is the money coming from? Is it another item that's coming out of fund balance?
I will
is
have
it
the
in-
comptroller
or is it-
treasurer answer your
Or is it
question.
budgeted, or is it in the budget?
I will
Thank you.
have the comptroller treasurer answer the question.
Yeah, so the money for this would be coming from the 2019 capital budget. So we had a little bit of money left over from 2019 capital, not a lot, but enough to cover the $10,000.
Thank you, comptroller treasurer. All right. Anyone else gone? Excellent. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed?
No.
Anyone who wishes to abstain? Motion carries 4-1. Thank you. Moving on. I'm wondering if we want to take 7 and 9 and move them to a next meeting and allow item 8 for the budget process. It is 10:42 and we still have a closed session. Is the committee heck bent on having all of the items on the agenda discussed, or could we take 7 and item 7 and item 9 and move them to the next agenda? Is there any opposition?
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Okay.
Awesome. All right. Budget process. Corey, please.
Sure. So this item is just a quick, review of the budget process, since we are starting the budget process again. So I do have the timeline included in your packet for both the capital budget and the operating budget, especially for the new alders. I think it's kind of a good quick guide as far as how both budgets take shape and the different meetings and so forth that happen that are related to the budget process. Right now we are in July and we have already solicited the capital requests from the various departments. So, and then also certainly willing to take any feedback that anyone has on the budget process itself, as far as things that could make the process better. So, and the other thing that I would note is typically in August, at August Finance, we start a preliminary discussion on the operating budget as well, to kind of talk about where the operating budget is sitting for the year and to discuss any priorities that the council has. So certainly, I know it's late. I don't want this to feel like, okay, this is your one and only opportunity, because typically, in August, we kind of try and have that preliminary discussion as far as how the budget is looking and any priorities.
So I think, both the mayor and I sent out emails to all of the alders asking you to look around your districts, talked with your constituents about capital projects, needs for improvements, investment. So please get that together and get that back to the mayor and Corey.
I did get some already.
Wonderful, thank you. And as it relates to the budget process too, as you think about priorities, whether that's for personnel funding, is that a priority? Other ways that we think we need to spend money or not spend money, as some would probably argue. So is that all we have right now, Corey, is basically pay attention, it's coming?
Yes. So, you already mentioned the Alder capital requests. August, we will have the feedback on the operating budget, and then September, we will present capital and bring capital for approval in October, and then end of October, we present the operating budget, and then November is final adoption of the whole thing.
All righty. Any questions for Corey right now about the budget process? Don't see any. Oh, I don't see any hands up. So, all right, moving on. Item 11, adjourn into closed session. It says approximately 8:15. Pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85(1) for the deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. On the following, negotiating an amendment to the development agreement for 1017 3rd Street, which is otherwise now known as North Side Yard, former Lullaby site.
Madam Chair, we need to do the approval of claims.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, all right.
But we'll save that very eloquent read until after this one.
I will move approval of the claims paid.
I second.
Lewinsky.
All right, there is a motion and a second. Any discussion about the claims paid? Seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? No. Abstentions? All right, motion carries, and I am not reading that whole darn thing again. You all know what I meant. And so now I would entertain a motion to go into closed session pursuant to what I read.
I move to move into closed session.
Second.
Motion by Morrow, second by, I think, Slowinski.
Yes.
I think we need a roll call.
Yes.
Yes, we do. Dalton,
No.
Slowinski,
Aye.
Morrow,
Aye.
Shore,
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Okay, vote
Okay,
of 4 to
we are-
1.
Thank you. We are in closed session at 10:48 p.m. And I'll
Okay.
wait. I don't
Yep.
know who's going to be leaving.
Yeah, give me a minute because I'll boot everybody back out, but we will not be taking action in open
Okay.
session. So those of you who expect action can feel free to not stick around.
City of Stevens Point Bicycle and Pedestrian Street Safety Commission, recorded December 10, 2019.